Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 2, Episode 57 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 11 and the rest of the 2022 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. How are we feeling going into Week 11?
Ugh, it's gross. Week 11. We're too far along in the season.
We're too far along, and on top of that, we have 4 teams on bye, maybe 5.
4.
Lots and lots of injuries. It is it's shaping out to be a messy week. So anyway, but that's what we're here for. We're here to help guide you guys through Week 11 and try to help you out with Week 11. So we have a lot of a bit of news to speak about, some injury updates heading into the weekend. We have our all boom and all bust teams, and we're going to end the show with our flex on them segment that we do. We do love a lot. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the show, and hopefully it's extremely helpful and helps you out with those Week 11 decisions. And if you don't get all the fantasy content you need in the show, or if your questions aren't answered, there's a lot of uncertainty heading into the weekend. That's totally okay. That means you should join us on Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on our Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter for our Sunday morning live show for Week 11. We go from about 8:30 a.m. to about 9:30, 10 o'clock a.m. Are the Jets home this week?
No, the Jets are on the road.
Jets on the road, so well, depending on Nick's schedule, we probably can go a little bit longer this week if we want to. We could go from 8:30 to 10. If you guys keep asking questions, we'll keep answering them. So on our YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we want to answer all of your questions. We want to help you guys out with your fantasy teams. We want to help set your lineups, help make trades if you could still make trades at that point. Probably can't. I think trade deadline is Saturday for most leagues. We just want to help you guys out to the best of our ability. So hopefully you join us on Sunday. Facebook and YouTube is PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, and Twitter is PrimeTimeFFPod. So yeah, hope to see you there. Aside from that, this is our Friday show. I already told you what we do on our Friday show. We do this show Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, available on all audio streaming platforms. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. We'd appreciate that. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button. If you're not watching on YouTube, go to YouTube, PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, hit that subscribe button, and then drop a like on this video. Keep interacting with us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, PrimeTimeFFPod, then Facebook and YouTube, PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Moving on to the injury updates and the news. First bit of news here. The Bills and Browns game is going to take place in Detroit due to literally like 6 feet of snow is going to happen in Buffalo this weekend. I think the game would have gotten canceled no matter what, but I love the jokes on Twitter basically saying that Singletary and Chubb would not be able to have played because they're under 6 foot.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I took this into account for a lot of my boom bust, but I still feel very, very good about some of those. Buffalo's not too far from Detroit. I'm pretty sure they're still getting some snow, just not as much.
They play in a dome.
Oh, do they? Okay.
They're in a dome. There's no weather impacts at this point.
Okay. I might have to make some impromptu changes.
You may need to make an audible here, which is totally okay. But yeah, so the game was moved. I think it had to be moved. A lot of fans are upset about this on Twitter and stuff. I mean, snow games are fun, but at the same time, I remember there's a really bad snow game. I forget if it was last year or the year before. I know the Browns like a 6-3 game or something. Do you remember which game I'm talking about?
I don't remember which game, but I do remember there being like 1.5 feet of snow.
Yeah. Yeah. So this would not have been a fun game from a fantasy perspective. So from a fantasy perspective, this is good. Mecole Hardman with the abdomen injury was placed on the IR. So he's going to be out 4 weeks. Same thing as Cooper Kupp and Dallas Goedert, etc. This opens up a spot for Kadarius Toney to really flourish in the offense. And he's having a pretty solid year for Mecole Hardman. So that's a loss to your fantasy team. Do you recommend dropping him, or if you don't have the IR spot at least, or what if you Cooper Kupp and Mecole Hardman?
I mean, if you don't have the IR spot, I think you have to drop him. I think Kadarius Toney will take over in that offense, but let's not confuse things, right? Like the rest of that wide receiving core is dinged up. Kadarius Toney has an extensive injury history. So let's say Mecole Hardman comes back week 14. There is a very good chance that he's a very good play. And the Chiefs have the second easiest schedule for the rest of the season. So you could definitely see Mecole Hardman being just as dominant as he was before the injury once he comes back. So he's not worth the roster spot if you don't have the IR spot. But if you do have the IR spot, why not just stick him there?
So Matthew Stafford is practicing this week, but he is still in concussion protocol. He hasn't cleared it yet. He's expected to be cleared, so that it is one to monitor at least. Last bit of news. I did miss this earlier in the week. I want to talk about it. Kyle Shanahan said on November 14th, the goal is for Christian McCaffrey and to Elijah Mitchell to have even carries going forward. You're a McCaffrey owner, like talk about it, because this is something I've spoken about in the past with Kyle Shanahan.
So I have CMC in one league, and I tried to trade him away this week in that league.
I didn't know that.
I did. I texted in the group chat in the league. I was very close on one offer, but I decided I'd rather take CMC ceiling. I know Elijah Mitchell is going to be there and present. Like I said, Elijah Mitchell is the best handcuff running back in football, and he's going to get the Kareem Hunt type workload from 2 years ago, where he's just purely going to eat into the volume. And some days are going to be his day. Some days are going to be CMC's day, and it sucks. But I mean, it is what it is. CMC last week still put up 18 fantasy points. He did find the end zone, which helped, but regardless, he's still putting up the numbers that you want to see from your running back one. Is he going to be the RB1 on the season? Not sure anymore, but is he still going to be a top 10 running back moving forward? Absolutely. That system still fits him too well for you to bench him or freak out. Just don't expect, running back 30 points per game anymore from Christian McCaffrey, because this is the first time in his career where you're seeing someone truly eat into his workload.
Kyle Shanahan's the worst head coach for fantasy purposes. I'm just saying it. I've been shouting it to the heavens for years, but he's the worst when it comes to fantasy. Okay, moving on to injuries. Players that did not practice on Thursday. We're recording Thursday night at about 7 o'clock before the Thursday night football games. This is the most up-to-date information we can give you. I'm sure if you're listening to the show on Friday or Saturday, there's more up-to-date information. So, did not practice Thursday. DeAndre Hopkins for personal reasons. Jerry Jeudy with the ankle, and Juju Smith-Schuster with concussion. My guess is that Jeudy and Juju are both out this weekend, which is big misses for your fantasy teams. Oops, I'm going to remove that from the notes. That should not be in there. Okay, limited practice. I'm going to separate the Cardinals first, because we'll save the Cardinals for last. Mark Andrews with a shoulder injury, Gus Edwards with a knee injury, Josh Allen with the elbow injury. All three also practiced Wednesday. Some other ones that practiced on Wednesday as well. Ezekiel Elliott with a knee, Devontae Adams with an abdomen, Justin Jefferson with a toe, Keenan Allen with a hamstring, Mike Williams with an ankle, A.J. Brown with an ankle, Devontae Smith with a knee. Some new injuries for Thursday that weren't reported, or some new practices at least. Cole Kmet practiced with his thigh injury, David Njoku with the ankle injury, he was limited, Marquise Felix-Scantling with an illness, and Curtis Samuel with a shin. So before we move on to the Cardinal part, I just want to ask you, your thoughts on the Chargers of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, because I did want to put a pass catcher from the Chargers on my all boom team, but I don't know who's playing, so I don't know who I could even put, but it's a pretty favorable matchup against the Chiefs, and it should be a shootout. The Chiefs defense isn't good against wide receivers, so I would say play whoever the two starting receivers are for the Chargers, but I can't even tell you who's going to start.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. For me, with injuries, like I just want to know, are you in, are you out? And if you are in and you were hurt, is it a hamstring or is it a groin injury? If it's a hamstring or a groin, it's going to linger during the game and it's going to affect your play. The rest of the injuries, they might hurt a little bit, right? Like if you have a shoulder or a knee injury, right? Like it might hurt at some point, but typically you can play through the pain there. Or you could take some of the injectable pain medication that numbs it and you get through the game, right? Hamstring, groin, those are the two I'm worried about. And you talked about Keenan Allen and his hamstring. Not sure anymore. We don't know what he's going to do week to week, but for me, if Keenan Allen's out there, I'm still playing him. Like I think Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are awesome players to talk about on our Sunday morning live show. It's really tough to diagnose now, but if you have questions about them, and the Sunday morning live show is really the way to go. 8:30 a.m. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. All right, let's talk about the Cardinals playing on Monday Night Football against the San Francisco 49ers. Kyler Murray has a hamstring injury. He missed last week. Conflicting reports here. There are reports he could miss a couple weeks. There are reports he could play this week. He did practice. Again, conflicting. Colt McCoy with the knee injury practice, and Marquise Brown with a foot injury. Marquise Brown has still not been activated off the IR, but he did practice. This is a mess because
you probably won't know much about these injuries until Monday, and this affects who you're going to play at quarterback, and if you want to play either Rondale Moore or Marquise Brown at wide receiver. So I guess what I'll ask you is, how do you handle this, and who are you confident in?
So here would be my question: if we knew all three were healthy, right? Who would you play? And the only one I think that you would confidently play this week would be Marquise Brown in this tough matchup. And even then, I don't know if you're comfortable playing him. For me, Kyler Murray probably would have been on my all bust team if he wasn't hurt. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to trust any of those three in a play. I don't know if I'm going to bank on Marquise Brown unless if I have like Brandon Ayuk, who I could bench for him, or one of the other deeper receivers like Rondale Moore on the team. So for me, I'm comfortable leaving all three on the bench and playing your other guys for Sunday.
Yeah, it's also tough for Kyler considering there's other quarterbacks on bye. Like I have Brady as my backup, and now I have to go and pick up a quarterback because of this situation. So it's very tricky. Full practices: DeAndre Swift with a shoulder and knee injury, Jamal Williams with an illness, Brandon Cooks with a hip and wrist, and Antonio Gibson with a knee. So positive stuff. Moving on to our Week 11 all boom teams. Players who think you're going to boom or have potential to boom, mainly in your flex spots. We don't like to use, star players. So anyway, Nick, who is your all boom quarterback? I already know who it is.
Of course you do, because everybody.
I know your quarterback. I know your quarterback. I know your running backs, and I might know one more.
You know both my running backs?
I know both your running backs and your tight end, I think.
Wow, look at that.
Unless our anonymous source gave me wrong information. Or I also, I'll preface this. I don't love my all boom team. I really don't. The matchups are really tough this week. So with that said, I shot off a boatload of players to our anonymous source because I wasn't sure who I wanted to even use. So anyway, quarterbacks, I had two picked out, but who was your all boom quarterback for Week 11?
I am going with Vanilla Vic, as coined by Saquon Barkley. I'm going with Daniel Jones. You take advantage of that Lions matchup every single time. The Lions are the worst team against starting quarterbacks. Last week, mobile quarterback Justin Fields finished as the QB1, and Daniel Jones has over 5 carries per game in all of his games, and he's averaging about 8 per game. I expect him to be Vanilla Vic in this game. I expect him to run the ball, to pass the ball. The most all-purpose yards he had this year was like 350. I see no reason why he can't shatter that number in this matchup. Also, he hasn't been turning the ball over as much. Justin Fields blew the game last week with a costly pick 6. Daniel Jones has not turned the ball over more than 4 times this year between fumbling and interception. So he's been incredibly consistent. He's been very good for fantasy, and I think he's a very, very good play this week.
Okay. My all-boom quarterback is Dak Prescott. Since returning from injury a couple weeks ago, back-to-back games, he has over 19 fantasy points. Now he's going up against the Minnesota Vikings defense that have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Top of that, Vikings have allowed 5 quarterbacks to score over 17 fantasy points in the last 11 weeks. That's a lot of points. A lot of points to go around. The Dallas offense is clicking. I didn't want to stack a lot of Dallas players, but every Dallas player is a play this week. The Vikings defense isn't great. It's their biggest weakness. They're an offensive team. They're all going to have really nice days, and Dak as well. They give up a lot of points to both wide receivers and tight ends, which means they're going to give up a lot of points to the quarterback as well because he's throwing to him. So Dak's a really nice play this week. If this is the week you've been waiting to play Dak, maybe you have Dak and you picked up Fields or something like that. And I would play Fields over Dak, so maybe that's a bad comparison. But this is a week to play Dak Prescott. Who is your first all boom running back for Week 11?
I'm going with Dante Foreman. He's averaging 20 yards per or 20 carries per game since becoming the starter only 4 weeks ago. And over that 4-week span, he has 400 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns. So he's seeing the workload, he's seeing the volume, and he's delivering on it. He's been very, very consistent for fantasy. And most importantly, Baker Mayfield is back. I know I like PJ Walker a lot more than Baker Mayfield, but if there's one thing Baker Mayfield has done in his career, it's been able to support running backs for fantasy football. Christian McCaffrey, he wasn't the RB1 that we saw at the beginning of the year with Baker, but he was still a top 5 running back. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt both had very good fantasy seasons, both finished inside the top 10 a few years ago with Baker Mayfield. So Baker knows how to manage his running backs for fantasy purposes. I'm going to absolutely trust him here. In the tougher matchups, maybe you don't trust him as much. in Dante Foreman, but they're going up against the Ravens. They're pretty much an average team against the run, and in an average matchup, I'll take the guy that's been this efficient for this long.
Okay. My first one is one of Nick's favorite players, Cordell Patterson. He's facing the Bears this week, and Nick, I know you're a believer in the Bears defense sometimes, but they're not great, especially the running backs. They've allowed the fourth most fantasy points to fantasy running backs. Patterson himself has had over 18 fantasy points in 3 of his 6 games this season, and the Bears defense has given up 14 touchdowns to running backs. I think Patterson makes it 15 on Sunday. Who's your second all-boom running back for Week 11?
I'm going with Devin Singletary. Now, I'll be honest. I thought he was getting the snowstorm game, which would have been even better. But beyond that, I still like the matchup. Cleveland allows the second most points to the running back position, and Devin Singletary's been pretty solid the last 4 games. He's averaging 12 points per game over that span. I expect the volume here. They know that they're bad against the run. They're going to run the ball. I think they're going to play a much more simplified offense over these next few weeks, especially with Josh Allen turning the ball over as much as he has been. I think they play a lot more conservative. They need to walk away with some more wins as that division is up for grabs. So I think the goal of this game is walk out with a win, and the way you're going to do that is ground and pound against the Browns.
I have the Washington running backs, and I favor Antonio Gibson a little bit, and I'll explain why. First off, the Houston Texans allow the most fantasy points to running backs, and it's not really close. 7 backs over the 11-game span have scored over 15 fantasy points. This is in standard PPR leagues, so that's a lot of points. Antonio Gibson, since Tyler Heineke has taken over, he has 3 games over 14 fantasy points. Now, Brian Robinson, he's been effective, but he doesn't catch a lot of balls. So that's why I do favor Antonio Gibson a little bit, because J.D. McKissick is probably also out again with an injury. So with that said, Antonio Gibson will take over McKissick's role as the pass catcher. So the game script should look pretty good for them. Definitely should run the ball a lot, and it should be a really productive game for Antonio Gibson and probably Brian Robinson as well. And I did know both your all-boom running backs, by the way. I tried to put both of them on my team. So who's your first all-boom wide receiver?
You almost got me to spoil it earlier, but I'm pretty much going whoever the wide receiver one is for the Chargers in this matchup. I wrote down Keenan Allen, but I know very well it could be Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joshua Palmer, or I guess it would be Palmer, because Carter would not be the wide receiver one over there. But one of those 3, whoever's the one, that is who I am targeting. Even the 2, I think, is a good play. Kansas City's been bad against wide receivers, and the wide receiver one over the last 3 games against the Chiefs for the Chargers is averaging about 22 fantasy points per game. Kansas City, once again, one of the 5 easiest against the wide receiver position. There is no doubt that if you have one of these receivers, they will boom in this matchup.
All right. My first wide receiver boom is a Bengal, because we love to talk Bengals on this podcast. I have T. Higgins. Steelers have allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. Chase that matchup. Bengals are also coming off the bye. They're a little bit healthier. They don't have Jamar Chase back yet. Hopefully in the next 2 weeks. The only thing that kind of scares me about this matchup is TJ Watt. The Steelers are a different team with him. It's kind of crazy, actually. They play much differently with TJ Watt. He did maul the Bengals on week 1. But I don't think that's going to stop T. Higgins from having a really productive fantasy day. I think this is the day that you've been waiting for. I think it's a big T. Higgins day on Sunday. Who is your second wide receiver boom for week 11?
I love your take, and I'm a one-up it. I am locking in Tyler Boyd. It's been 4 weeks since I put a Bengals player or a player from the team facing the Bengals on the all-boom or all-bust teams, because I've been avoiding it, but I could not avoid this matchup. Just like you said, second easiest team against wide receivers, and Tyler Boyd in games without Jamar Chase is averaging 15 points per game. He's been incredibly consistent without him. He is probably the most underrated pass catcher in the league at the moment. He is good enough to be a wide receiver too on most NFL teams.
Yep.
I think he's more than talented. Again, coming off the bye, getting healthy. I know they got mauled in week 1 by the Steelers, but I think the Bengals got a good shot here, and I think I like this matchup for all those pass catchers.
Yep. So my second wide receiver boom, and I was kind of surprised when I texted our anonymous source and he said he didn't take this guy, so I'm happy you didn't. I have Kadarius Toney. He scored 19 fantasy points last week, and I think there was a game when he actually started. I think this was his first game as a starter, I think. I could be wrong on that, but it feels like this is his first game fully playing in that offense. They're banged up. Mecole Hardman's out. Seems like Juju's going to be out. And Marquise Valdes-Scantling's dealing with an injury. He should play, but I think that makes Kadarius Toney the wide receiver 1. This morning, I saw that Travis Kelce basically praised him and said it was ridiculous that they let him walk out of that Giants facility. And they're facing a Chargers defense who hasn't really been good against pass catchers. 6 wide receivers have scored more than 18 fantasy points against the Chargers. If you picked up Kadarius Toney, I think you're due. I think you're really due, and you're going to be really thrilled with the performance this week and the rest of the season. Who is your first flex starter on your All Boom team?
Nick, I have a question for you.
I like questions. Let's hear what we got.
Okay, so in the last 2 games, I made it a little bit harder. In the last 2 games, this receiver has 16 targets, 14 catches on him for 214 yards. And the 2 teams that they faced were top 10 against wide receivers.
Okay, so the 2 teams he's faced were good against wide receivers.
And he delivered.
I'm trying to think of who's.
I got 2 hints here, so I'll give you hints if you need. It's pretty broad. The first hint is that he is a rookie.
Crap, who did the Saints play last week? I don't think it's Olave. Is it you're not putting Garrett Wilson, are you?
You're damn right I'm putting Garrett Wilson.
Oh my Lord.
Garrett Wilson, jet up. 2 weeks ago, we faced the same Patriots team, and he put up over 100 receiving yards. For the 2-game span, Corey Davis was not playing. In games where Corey Davis is not playing, Garrett Wilson is averaging a calm 18 fantasy points per game. That tells me you got to play him. And I know we're scared of Belichick in that Belichick matchup, but he showed me 3 weeks ago that he could put up 100 yards on that secondary. So there's no reason for me to fade him. I'm going to lock him in coming off the bye. He's going to walk into Foxborough, and he's going to go make a statement right there. I'm very confident in him putting up close to a 20-point bomb if he can find the end zone.
All right. So here's the thing. I have notes for 3 players that I like in my flex spots. I don't know which 2 I want to use, so you're going to get all 3 of them. First off, I have Gabriel Davis in a game that's not going to be a snow game. Browns have allowed 8 players to score, or 8 wide receivers to score over 15 fantasy points. They've also allowed the 4th most fantasy points to receivers on the perimeter, like Gabriel Davis normally is. The game is also being played inside the Detroit Lions dome, so you don't have to worry about the weather. Josh Allen's elbow's fine. His noggin looked a little messed up last week when he was throwing to the purple team instead of the red team, but his arm looked fine. Gabriel Davis had a solid day, and so did Diggs. I think they have another solid day this week because the Browns are not a good football team, especially on defense. So there you go. Gabriel Davis should be a nice play this week. So who's your second flex spot that you're going to boom this week?
I'm going very bold here. I went very bold for the 2 flex plays. I already locked Garrett Wilson in. I'm going with probably the boldest player any of us has ever put in the history of the segment.
Interesting.
On the boom team. I'm going Chase Claypool. I'm digging real deep here for a solid game. Personally, I'm not playing him. I don't want to risk it. But if you have Chase Claypool, I think he's a good play. Cole Kmet, the last few weeks, has been their athletic guy that's been in the middle of the field. Chase Claypool is going to take over that role at some point. Chase Claypool is a 6'5" more athletic version of the pass catcher that is Cole Kmet, and he is miles better. They put him in the slot in Pittsburgh, and that's where they're putting him in Chicago. I think that there's a very good shot that you watch this big athletic target for Justin Fields start to develop in this offense. And if it's going to happen any week, this is the week to do it. It's 2 weeks after the trade. That's typically when you see the receiver, the new player, fully get implemented in the offense. So if Chase Claypool is going to be the valuable pick that they traded, I think, a second rounder for him. If he's going to be worth a second round draft pick, this is the week where they're going to show that this is why he was worth it. So I think he could put up a solid 12 to 15 points, and by Claypool standards on the season, that is more than startable.
Okay. I'm going to negate one player, and I'm going to bump this one up. So for my second flex play, I have Paris Campbell in his last 3 games with Matt Ryan. So he faced the Raiders, the Jaguars, and I can't remember the third one. I forget who they had last week. The last week was the Raiders. One other team. I forget which one it was. he has averaged over 18 fantasy points in all three. He has averaged over 10 targets. He has averaged over 65 yards, and he has had a touchdown in all three. That is Matt Ryan's wide receiver 2. He is feeding him. He is comfortable with him. And as long as Matt Ryan is healthy enough to throw the ball, as long as they're going to use Matt Ryan and let him throw a bit, I think Paris Campbell is a really sneaky play. I don't love the matchup in Philly at all. However, Darius Slay should not be on Paris Campbell. He should be on Michael Pittman. Terry McLaurin just scored 23 fantasy points for the Commanders on Monday night. So I think Paris Campbell's a really sneaky play, not just this week, but just about every other week, as long as he's getting the volume as a wide receiver too. Who is your tight end boom of the week?
I'm going with George Kittle. I feel like, there's some tight ends I feel like you're not really allowed to put them, and Kittle might be on the fringe of that, but I don't think he's been good enough this season for us to take him off that list.
No, he hasn't.
San Francisco is loaded everywhere. I think that's been taken away from Kittle's workload. But Arizona is the worst team against the tight end position in fantasy football. The 3 games before the bye, he has looked a lot better. He had 200 yards and 2 touchdowns over that span, averaging 17 points per game. That was the tight end 2 over that stretch, only with Kelsey above him. So I think it's time for him to get back on track. I like the matchup. I like the play, and I think you could get your Monday Night Miracle with him.
Okay. My boom is actually Cole Kmet, because I don't think Chase Claypool is taking over that role at all. He has 5 touchdowns in 3 games. He's the most targeted player on the team. Justin Fields may not be a rookie per se, but he's still getting his feet wet in the league, especially as a passer. And Cole Kmet's a guy that he trusts. He's a guy that the fantasy community trusted before the season. In the last 2 weeks, he's over 6 targets and over 20 fantasy points. I don't see Justin Fields just moving off a target that he trusts. And I don't think he trusts Darnell Mooney. I don't think he trusts Claypool. I think he trusts his legs first, and then I think he trusts Cole Kmet. And I just don't see him going off the safety blanket this soon. The Falcons are a bad football team. They've allowed the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends. They've allowed 2 wide receivers or pass catchers per se to both score over double digits. I think 8 out of 11 weeks or something like that. So I don't see that changing. Here's my wild card. It's not going to go on the graphic, but I do have a note here, which is why I'm just going to throw him up there, because I thought about using him. David Montgomery is a really good play as well. No Khalil Herbert, nobody breathing down his neck. It's all David Montgomery. He's going to get all the passes from a running back perspective. He'll be the pass catching back, and he'll be the running back. His competition is now Justin Fields. With that said, Falcons have also allowed the 8th most fantasy points to running backs. We're kind of booming all the Bears, which is kind of scary. But yeah, this is a week to play your Bears, because the Falcons are a really bad defense. So there you go. Bear down. I have a bet on the Bears. Okay. Like, if they can win like 2 more games, I win like $50 and it'd be nice. They have to win more games than the Texans. And I like that. Bear down, baby. Bear down. All right. Week 11, all bust teams. Who is your all bust quarterback? How many players on my team did you know? Because I knew your running backs, your quarterback, and your tight end. I don't think I knew your receivers.
I know 2 of them. 2.
Okay. All right.
I know a running back, and I know I know 2 running backs.
Okay.
And I know a wide receiver.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Who's your quarterback?
I am going with Kirk Cousins. Cowboys are top 10 against the quarterback position in fantasy. And what's better than 1 o'clock Kirk Cousins? Nobody. But what's better than 425 Kirk Cousins and PrimeTime Cousins? Everybody. So I ain't taking Kirk Cousins.
I don't know, man. I don't know. Kirk's dug in the last 2 weeks. He looks legit.
So only he over the course of the entire season, he only has 3 games over 17 points. And only 2 games this year he has without a turnover. So he's been very turnover prone against most teams, in the Cowboys first top 5 in forcing turnovers. I think this is going to be a nightmare matchup for Kirk Cousins. I'm not saying they're going to lose the game, but this is not the matchup I want to play. The QB 13 that's been good for real football, not great for fantasy.
Okay. I am going with Derek Carr, somebody who's let me down this season. I was high on him, and I think it's a Josh McDaniels problem a little bit, but Derek Carr looks bad, man. He looks really bad. The Broncos have allowed the least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks. And Carr's without some of his weapons. No Darren Waller, no Hunter Renfrow. Even if they haven't had the best year of their career, there's still weapons that he could look to and throw to, and now they don't have that. The last time he played the Broncos, he only had 11 fantasy points. That was his second worst game of the season. I think this could end up being his worst game of the season. If I'm the Broncos, why am I not double teaming Davante Adams? He has nobody else to throw to. Like, let Matt Collins beat you at that point. So it's a bad matchup for Carr. If you thought about streaming him, if Kyler's out and you want to play Carr, I just think it's a really bad matchup. I'd almost rather play like Heineke or Russell Wilson or a couple other people. Russell Wilson's going to have a great game this week because he's wearing his armband.
Let's ride.
Have you seen the whole armband gate thing? He's such a weenie. He showed up to the press conference the other day wearing the armband. He's such a weenie. All right. Who's your first all bust running back of the week?
I am going with Najee Harris, and I hate to do it because I do think Najee is more talented than the season he's having. But the last time he played Cincinnati, he only scored 10 points, and in that 10 points was a touchdown. He only averaged in that game 2.3 yards per carry, and he only had 2 catches for 3 yards. So he was very, very bad for fantasy. On top of that, he hasn't cracked 14 points all year long. That is rough for a guy that you drafted in the first round. And to be honest, Jaylen Warren has looked better out of that backfield. Mike Tomlin even said in an interview that he wants to get Warren more involved, and he thinks that he's been one of the more efficient players on the entire team. And when your coach says that about your running back, typically they're not lying. So, and Tomlin is a very straight shooter. He's not someone that likes to dance around the question like a Sean McVay or a Kyle Shanahan. So that does worry me a lot for Najee Harris. He's probably one of the only guys that you drafted in the first or second round where I think you could very much bench them, and it makes sense.
Yep. Another guy that you drafted probably round 2, maybe 3 is James Conner, and he should definitely hit your bench. Facing the San Francisco 49ers, who allowed the least most fantasy points to running backs. He only has 2 games the entire season over 15 fantasy points. That's not the player that you drafted. So I think it could be a messy game for the Cardinals on Monday night. I did see a stat that in the last, I believe it was 15 meetings, the Cardinals have beaten the Niners 11 times. That's weird. But this 49ers team is way too talented to lose to this Cardinals team. So it should be a bad game for James Conner. Who is your second all bust running back for week 11?
I'm going with DeAndre Swift. Listen, if DeAndre Swift were fully healthy, I would still tell you not to play him in this matchup. The Giants have been top 5 against the run. And let's take now the health factor into it. Over the last 3 games, he only has 23 total carries, carries and targets. So as a combination, that's been his total workload over a 3-week span. And he has less than 100 yards on that. He got bailed out by a touchdown in 2 of the 3 matchups to have not even fine days. One of them was an 8-point game and the other one was 14, which is all right, I guess. But I still don't think he's 100%. He's dealing with 2 injuries right now. And Dan Campbell is absolutely load managing the hell out of him. Even if his workload goes up, once again, I still don't like the matchup for him. So I would fade him very much.
I don't like the matchup either. So I'm busting the Jamal Williams. On top of everything Nick just said, he splits with DeAndre Swift. I think whoever scores the touchdown has a better game. I don't think they're both scoring touchdowns. I don't really want to take that chance if I don't have to. Now, I do have to take that chance. I made a trade this week. I'm without Travis Etienne and my backups in that league. It's a 12-man league where Khalil Herbert and Alexander Madison. So I did not have a running back 2 available to pair with Josh Jacobs this week. I needed to trade for a running back before the deadline. I traded Courtland Sutton for Jamal Williams. I don't hate the trade. Courtland Sutton hasn't looked great this year. My wide receivers on that team are Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I don't hate giving away Sutton to make sure I have a running back for the rest of the playoffs. So anyway, I do have to play Jamal Williams. I'm not happy about it, but it's better than playing like Latavius Murray or something like that. All
Just
right.
to add on real quick, who I wanted to bust was Lions running backs in general. So I'm totally on board with your take on
All right. Who is your first wide receiver bust of the week?
I'm going with Amari Cooper. And again, it's something that I factored in the Blizzard game. But a big note of mine was if there was no Blizzard, I still would not trust him going up against.
It's an away game now. It's not a home game.
It is not a home game. But once again, I still would not trust him in this matchup with the Blizzard. With the Blizzard, it would have been like not even touchdown or bust. If you saw a touchdown, you still probably wouldn't have had a good fantasy day. But in this matchup, it is going to be touchdown or bust. And I think this is a very big Bills get right game. They're going to play this game a lot harder than they played any of their other games. So I think Buffalo is going to go out there and absolutely obliterate the Cleveland Browns this week.
All right. My first wide receiver bust of the week, I'm just going to move him up here. I have Garrett Wilson because Bill Belichick takes away the number one option from any team. He got beat by Garrett Wilson 3 weeks ago. He's not going to be happy about it. He's going to go out there and develop a game plan for his Patriots defense to find a way to take away Garrett Wilson. They're the third best team against wide receivers. They're coming off the bye. He had 2 weeks to prepare for this Jet game. Nick, this is your worst nightmare as a Jets fan. He loves beating the Jets. You could tell he loves beating the Jets. You can't deny it. And the Jets are rolling right now. This is the game that Bill Belichick wants coming off the bye. He had 2 weeks to prepare for it. And it's in Foxborough. So I don't know if they're going to get any remnants of the snowstorm. I'm not exactly sure where it's passing.
I'm pretty sure they are.
They probably will. So at that point, I wouldn't want to play many pass catchers in this game, if any. And Zach Wilson's been okay, but he's not the reason they're winning football games. Their defense is phenomenal. The running game has been great. Zach is doing well as a game manager, but I think you put the game on his shoulders and he's not beating the Patriots. So with all that said, I would not trust Garrett Wilson this week like Nick is. So one of us will be right. We'll see what happens, but we do disagree on that one. Your second wide receiver bust of the week.
Well, one of us is going to be right about this one too. I am busting Gabriel Davis.
There you go.
So one of us is going to either hit a parlay or we'll split, whatever. But Gabe Davis, I mean, once again, I know they used him in the short game last week, but that's not the way that he's meant to play. He is really meant to be a deep threat, and he might be good in this matchup now that there is no snowstorm, but he has one of the lowest floors in fantasy football for one of the elite players. Let me just pull up some of his numbers this season, because it is actually shocking how bad of games he's had compared to how good of games he's had. So he has 4 games this year that he played the entire game, and he scored under 7 fantasy points. 3 of them are under 5. He also has 3 games where he scored over 18 fantasy points. So I know we always talk about boom bust with guys like Tyler Lockett, but I think Gabriel Davis kind of fits that exact mold. It's like he's either going to go deep and catch you some big passes, or he's not. Another thing is he only has 1 game this year, last week, where he had more than 4 catches. That's not good. Like, he is literally the definition of touchdown or bust. I'm going to read you his best games of the year. Pittsburgh, who's allowed the most points to wide receivers, 3 catches for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is a big outlier. The following week, his third biggest game of the year, 3 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown against Kansas City, one of the worst 5 teams against wide receivers. And then last week, one of his second best game of the year, 6 catches, which off his most targets of the year, for 93 yards and a touchdown. Another thing I want to factor in is over the entire course of the season, he's only caught 50% of his targets. Like, that is not good. That's literally worse than DJ Moore last year, where DJ Moore did not have a good fantasy finish. And we said with better and more accurate quarterback play, he would be a lot better. So for me, Gabriel Davis, as much as I didn't like him before the year, and I've kind of leaned more into, I like the boom bust player, like, it's almost too big of a bust to risk more weeks than not.
All right. My second bust wide receiver of the week is Michael Pittman. The biggest note I have here is that the Eagles have allowed the 9th least fantasy points to wide receivers. They should be playing angry this weekend, just like the Bills, and I think it could be a pretty rough game for the Colts all around. I know I have Paris Campbell up there, but again, I like his chances a lot more than I like Michael Pittman. I think Paris Campbell has better stats than Michael Pittman does with Matt Ryan, and Michael Pittman may be the more talented wide receiver, but I think Matt Ryan might trust Paris Campbell a little bit more. So I would avoid playing Michael Pittman this week. And I think I prefer Paris Campbell, as crazy as that sounds. So there you go. Who's your first flex spot boom of the week or bust
Nick,
of the week?
I have a second question for you this week. I decided to be generous.
What do we got?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a lot more information on this guy. So he's only missed 1 game this season.
Yep.
And he's the wide receiver 29. He's only averaging 13.5 points per game. He only had 1 finish over the course of the season within the top 20 wide receivers, and he was drafted within the top 20 wide receivers.
I was going to say Amon-Ra, but it's not Amon-Ra. Missed 1 game. Was it Mike Evans? No, he's on bye. He's on bye. Man, I'm trying to factor in on. Let's see. Hasn't had really many big games. It was drafted in the top 20, but also missed a game. Christian Kirk?
No.
Who is
Christian Kirk was drafted a little bit later. It is Deebo Samuel. And I'll give you a lot of credit because you were a lot lower on him than I was before the year. But
I was anti Deebo Samuel.
I didn't think it would be this bad. Right now, there are too many mouths to feed with Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and of course Deebo. Ever since CMC and Mitchell got back there, Deebo Samuel hasn't been used as a running back as much, not nearly as much. I think he only had like 6 carries over the last 2 weeks, which is
what he also didn't want before the season either.
Exactly. So he's getting what he wanted, but he's not getting the production. Deebo's going to be down the field a lot more, and a big part of his game was running the ball and catching those wide receiver or running back screens. That's all Christian McCaffrey's game. So you are now taking away the biggest like dynamic portion of Deebo Samuel's game for the rest of the year. Like you have to lock him in because of the name, like the ceiling, but he's coming off his worst game of the year, and they took him out as a running back, like in a game that's favorable for running backs. Like, I don't know if you're going to see the league winning usage from him for the rest of the year. And I know your trade deadline either is coming up or just came up. Like, I would go trade away Deebo Samuel frantically.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're in big trouble.
I mean, I think I'd have to go back to our episode, but I think I said Deebo might be a big loser in this trade because of this. They're almost essentially the same player, but they play different positions. You know, one plays receiver a little bit better than the other. One plays running back a little bit better than the other. But they're both very versatile. But now you have 2 of them in there, and everybody can't get theirs every week. And that's why the 49ers, as a fantasy football team, is very tricky. So my first flex bench is going to be Deontay Johnson. Bengals have allowed the 8th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. He's been unplayable. I've seen him dropped in 2 of my leagues. He's still getting targets, but I don't think he's had a touchdown this year. I'd have to look at the stats again. I don't think he has.
He has the most targets in the league for a receiver that has not caught a touchdown pass. I think it's like 91 targets.
Yeah. The targets are great, but he's not scoring enough touchdowns, and he's not getting his 100-yard games either. He's going like 5 for 60, which is nice. But it's only 11 fantasy points, and you can play a slew of other receivers that are going to get you 13, 15, 17, etc. Deontay Johnson has to hit your bench in a really tough matchup. Bengals coming off the bye. They should have his game planned. This is not good for Deontay Johnson.
Just to further that point, over the last 6 games, Deontay Johnson is averaging under 10 points per game.
Yep.
So for a guy getting close to 10 targets a game, that is utterly ridiculous.
It is, yeah. Imagine they had a Big Ben out there still. He'd be a better player. All right. Your last flex bust of the week.
I'm going with Terry McLaurin. He's quietly having one of the best seasons of the year.
I almost boomed him.
The Texans are having one of the best seasons of the defensive seasons of the year against the wide receiver position. And it's purely because they're so bad against the run. So for every reason that you love the Washington running backs is every reason I don't love the pass catchers out there. And Derek Stingley's quietly having a good year. He's getting very much overshadowed by me and Nick's guys, Tariq Woolen, and of course, Ahmad Sauce Gardner. But Stingley has been very, very good. And so is McLaurin, but I don't love the matchup. Like Nick said, I think it's a run the ball game, and the pass catcher will be Antonio Gibson out there. McLaurin could have a good game, but take away the name Houston. If I just told you what, like the team he's going up against is top 3 against the wide receiver position, and the quarterback is Taylor Heineke, a lot more people are going to fade that receiver.
I am going to bust Devontae Smith. The Colts have allowed the 2nd least points to wide receivers. And on top of that, Devontae Smith has scored less than 10 in 3 of his last 6 games. That's not ideal. Flex spot or wide receiver. The Eagles are still a run-first team. A.J. Brown is still the target monster over there. This is just not going to be a solid game for Devontae Smith. And I'm not sure how playable he's going to be down the stretch as long as Miles Sanders is getting the goal line work like he is, and Jalen Hurts as well. I think it's going to be tough for him to have really productive fantasy games. Who is your tight end bust of the week?
I'm going with Juwan Johnson. And I know people might say that's all right. That's a reach. Like he shouldn't even be rostered, but he's been pretty hot in 3 of his last 4 games. He has over 12 points, including 4 touchdowns over that stretch. So he has been pretty good for fantasy, but the Rams are the 2nd best team in the league against the tight end position. So when you have an average pass catcher or average tight end like Juwan Johnson that is touchdown or bust, you don't play him in those top matchups. So keep it short and sweet. Average pass catcher, elite defense against the position, ain't a good play.
Nick, I have a question for you.
Oh my goodness, I'm excited.
First off, what do you think my question is?
Who is the best team against tight ends? And is it the New Orleans
That
Saints?
is, you got my question and you got my answer. I love this trend. I love it. We're in week 11 and I could still use it. Tyler Higbee's my bust of the week. He's facing the number one team against tight ends. The number one team against tight ends has not allowed a tight end to hit double-digit fantasy points. Isaiah Likely came close with 9.5 because he had one catch for 5 yards and a touchdown. I think Zach Ertz came close to like 6 or 7, who had double digits in every other game except for the one against the Saints. Unless the Saints are facing the Chiefs this year, I don't think any tight end's going to score over double digits against them. So I'm going to keep busting their tight ends if I'm allowed.
Do you want to know something really funny?
Yeah.
I checked to see who I wanted to bust at tight end. And I said, ooh, Tyler Higgins has a tough match. Oh, that's New Orleans. Oh, that's Nick's tight end. I ain't even going to put it down.
Yep. It's too easy. It really is. All right. Moving on to flex on. I'm going to give you one player from each team that you could play in your flex spots. But we're going to tell you which one we would rather play. And, maybe you don't want to play either of them or want to play both of them. All right. Bears at the Falcons. David Montgomery or Cordell Patterson. I said they're both booms.
I'm taking David Monty here. He is going to be the RB1 in that offense. No Khalil Herbert now, so I'll take him in a better matchup.
I think he's had 3 straight games under 10, even though I think he's going to have a boom week. I'm going to take Cordell Patterson. Donovan Peoples-Jones or Gabriel Davis inside that Ford Field Dome in Detroit.
Over the last 6 games, Donovan Peoples-Jones is averaging 12 fantasy points per game. I know Gabe Davis is more boom or bust, as I discussed earlier. So I'm going to take the consistency from Donovan Peoples-Jones, and I'd rather play him than Gabe Davis.
Bills by $1 billion, Gabriel Davis. Devontae Smith or Paris Campbell?
Great question. I'll go Devontae Smith. I know you like Paris Campbell, but I'm terrified of playing that Eagles secondary.
I am too, but I've seen their secondary get exposed. I'll go Paris Campbell. Garrett Wilson or Jacoby Myers?
I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson here, but I think both are going to have fine days. I think both finish in that 15 range.
If the weather's bad, they're both going to have really bad days, but I'll go with Jacoby Myers. Allen Robinson or Chris Olave?
I'll go with Olave here for the consistency, but I would not be surprised if Allen Robinson outscored him this week.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Jamal Williams or Darius Slayton because the Giants don't have flex players.
I want to check Slayton's stats because I think he had 2 or 3 very good games in a row.
I think he did, so I'll go Slayton because I don't love Jamal Williams this week. But the Giants are my least favorite team to use this segment for.
So over the last 3 games, he is averaging 14 fantasy points per game. His floor has been 11.5. He has 16 targets over that 3-game stretch, so that's about 5 a game. I think I'd rather roll him out in the Lions secondary.
All right. Dante Foreman or Gus Edwards?
I'll go with Dante Foreman all day here.
I'll go with Dante Foreman as well. I wanted to boom him. Curtis Samuel or Brandon Cooks?
I'll go with Curtis Samuel. Brandon Cooks almost had a touchdown that last week, but when you're stripped to your captain badge, that's
bad. I don't remember the last time I've seen that happen. That's middle of the season too. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Foster Moreau or Greg Dulcich?
Great question.
It is a great
question by you, Nick. I'm going to go with Greg Dulcich.
I'll go with Dulcich as well. Ezekiel Elliott or Dalvin Cook?
If you told me that Zeke was out and it was Tony Pollard, I would have taken Tony Pollard over Cook.
Wow.
But I ain't taking Zeke over Dalvin Cook.
I will take Zeke.
You'll take Zeke over Dalvin Cook?
That Cowboys front 7 is really good. And I think 2 of the last 4 games that Cook has had over 20 was because he had that long 80-yard touchdown.
Okay.
Aaron
Judge won the MVP, baby.
There we go.
Let's go.
I love that.
Welcome back to New York, by the way. You're more than welcome.
Yep. All right. All right. Kadarius.
What a way to end the episode.
I'm sorry. Yeah. T. Higgins or Deontay Johnson?
T. Higgins all day.
All right. Kadarius Toney or Joshua Palmer?
If Palmer is the wide receiver, one Palmer. If not, Kadarius Toney.
I'm going Kadarius Toney either way. All right. Last game, Monday Night Football. Brandon Ayuk or Hollywood Brown. Brandon Ayuk or Hollywood Brown / Rondale Moore, whichever one starts.
I mean, there's so many factors in this game. If everyone's healthy, it's Hollywood. If Hollywood's out. Like, it comes down to who the quarterback is. I think I'd rather just trust Brandon Ayuk.
Yep. I'll go with the Cardinals receiver. All right. That is our show for Friday, November 18th. That is our Week 11 show the Friday show going into Week 11. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching on YouTube, please drop a like on this video. We appreciate that. Make sure you share those links with your friends so you can share the love of the Primetime Fantasy Podcast. If we didn't answer all your questions, we're sorry about that, but we want to answer them on Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Facebook and YouTube is Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Twitter is PrimeTimeFFPod. I do recommend using YouTube or Facebook so your questions actually get seen on our StreamYard page rather than Twitter's a little bit tougher with that. But anyway, we would love to answer all your questions on Sunday. We're going to go from 8:30 to about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. See you guys on Sunday for the live. Best of luck in Week 11.